in the kind of post-COVID era. So thank you so much for attending. Today's session is hosted by ISOC Namibia chapter, as well as Small Media, and within Small Media, the UPR project. My name is Hannah Macklin, pronouns she, her, and I'm going to be your moderator today. And how we're going to organize this is I'm going to give a few introductory remarks and then introduce my distinguished panelists across the board. And then as they're all experts on the UPR, we are going to then give you all some tangible advice on how to really innovate your national processes in order to amplify digital rights at home. So for those who are not familiar, Small Media is an institution that works to support the free flow of information and particularly politically closed societies. We're a design-driven organization that originally started work in Iran, but now has increased its scope of work to cover Africa and the Middle East. And with our project, Uproar, we really saw an opportunity in terms of the lack of engagement in the UPR. So for those who aren't familiar, the UPR is the Universal Periodic Review, which is a human rights mechanism within the UN. And this lack of engagement in UPR, we really saw an opportunity for civil society organizations across the world to really be able to have a conversation with UN representatives, as well as their own state representatives around digital rights. So sort of within this methodology, we've developed a variety of resources, including something called Uproar Tools, which is an online tool which shows you distinct and detailed information about your country in terms of what has happened in each cycle. So for example, what recommendations your country has received, as well as what sort of recommendations in terms of the specific lexicon used should be used to sort of use to create recommendations going forward. And a key part of the Uproar project is its grassroots approach. So Uproar works with, believe now over 50 partners across the MENA and Sub-Saharan African region. And these civil society organizations are focusing on freedom of expression and digital rights. And, another important aspect of why we wanted to talk about the UPR and innovation today is that as you all might know, we're generally seeing a shrinking space online with things like internet shutdowns and COVID-related surveillance. And as you know, at the same time, the internet is a key part of everyday life in general. With the pandemic, our hospitals are online, our day jobs are online. So it's essential that we preserve this. And one of the means that we can preserve this is through the UPR. And we feel the UPR is one of the few remaining channels of communication to really push the importance of digital rights through. It has been a missed opportunity because it is a direct channel to speak to UN representatives who therefore speak to your state representatives about key issues around human rights. And within this context, we really need to see more grassroots voices at the UPR. And that is exactly what our distinguished panelists have been doing. And this is what's been happening quite excitingly in Namibia, the Gambia, as well as Sierra Leone. And I think that means I can sort of pivot to introducing our speakers. First, we have Nashilongo Gervasius, who is based in Namibia. Nashilongo is a digital policy analyst, research, media, and comms specialist. She's also the founder and executive director of Tom Chuwe, a digital and public policy communication and tech hive, which consults on policy, media, and communication development. She is also one of the co-hosts of the session, and she is the founding president of the ISOC Namibia chapter. Thank you, Nashilongo, for joining us today. And next we have Joel Abdullah Kalon, who is coming to us from Sierra Leone. Joel is an independent consultant as well as the founder and national coordinator of Chosen Generation. Chosen Generation helps advance youth empowerment, digital rights, and relates to ICT policy issues within Sierra Leone. And then we have, last but not least, Alu So, who is coming to us from the Gambia. Alu is the founder and country director of the Give One Gambia project. Alu coordinates the Give One project, which focuses on advocating for internet freedom in the country. He also heads an advocacy project engaging the National Assembly of the Gambia. So thank you so much to all the panelists, and each one of these panelists as well is a national partner on the Uproar project, and they've all done some really exciting work on the UPR, and I'm really excited for everyone else to hear expertise from them. So without further ado, I think we can kind of segue into the question section and really take advantage of these really incredibly interesting and experienced activists with us today. So let's go ahead and get started. So how this is going to work, everyone, is I'm going to direct questions to each people, but please feel free to interject afterward and give your insight as well. This should be very collaborative. So yeah, let's get going. So first one directed to Nasha Longo. With your experience conducting research on the Universal Periodic Review in Namibia, how do you conduct research for preparation for UPR? So sort of the first kind of stages before, maybe even years before the country review actually takes place.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you everyone who has joined us in this room today. I'm excited to be here and engage on this very topic that we have possibly worked for the last few months as we prepare, especially for Namibia's review process that happened in May this year. So how that process was for us. It entailed, first of all, reviewing the previous reviews for the country by other countries at the UN, and really trying to understand what were the previous recommendations and build on that. Specifically, then it went on to our specific report. Included things like, just have an overview about the constitutionalism on digital rights issues. Also, reviewing the policy in enabling environment within the country, entailing obviously newer statistics on connectivity within the country, but also looking at other wider variety of indicators that would inform an update, for instance, in the country. For the digital rights, in particular, we looked at things like, freedom of expression and freedom of expression online, issues of access and equality online, enabling factors such as infrastructure availability, amongst others. And finally, I think we also looked at really setting up recommendations that we thought that for our within our specific sector, which is digital rights issues, could be looked at or could be advocated for by the partners of the organizations that we worked with, which is Small Media and CPESA. So that included, the methodology for us, because of COVID, obviously, was really delving into a lot of desktop reviewing existing data that existed for the past within the last period of 4 years since Namibia was was reviewed. So in essence, yeah, a lot of reviewing, a lot of really understanding what digital rights issues are. It could be, you know, pronouncement by politicians, or, you know, that could have an effect on policy issues. It could be, in many of the cases, was really provisions within you know, the policies and legal frameworks that we have in the country. I think it was a very good experience, but it also entailed working very well, or, you know, with other stakeholders within this space, who are advocating for, you know, openness and equality of the online space. Yeah. So let me end there, Hannah.
Thanks, Nashilongo. And just to summarize that, so then you would really recommend to other CSOs to do an in-depth sort of deep dive, as we would say, into the past cycles, and then really make sure you understand all the nuances of, in this case, digital rights, in order to kind of put that into a stakeholder report or another report. Is there anything else that you think that CSOs really need to sort of jot down if they're listening in today?
So true, yes. It included all of those things, you know, to be included in the review, the nuances, some of the hidden messages that might not be very obvious for a researcher. We were also very fortunate to work, or at least in the end of our launch event, to engage with other CSOs who have made submissions, for instance, from other aspects such as sexual reproductive health for girls, but also for the sexual minorities, such as the LGBTI communities, and also engaging really also with government to understand what was their report has been, because in the past, obviously, that process was not very open to a lot of CSOs. But also the digital rights movement and space has been very, very new within the country. So yeah, for other CSOs who have been working previously within the UPR reviewing mechanisms, it's really including understanding the reviewing mechanisms, which could be challenging, especially for the deeper CSOs that deals, you know, who are at the very bottom of the grassroots, who are based in the villages. And so, yeah, it included really having those understanding, able to cross reference, for instance, issue, you know, a pronouncement by somebody, and be able to say, wait a minute, but this links directly to this issue. Yeah, you know, for us, it included even just social media engagement, or what is being debated or constituted within parliament, parliamentary discussions, you know, different sectors of society's standings or pronouncements or engagement on different issues. But it also looks at other things like the pricing of the internet, the availability of data, everything that makes up, you know, that, yeah, eventually makes up to the issues of, you know, rights online of a human.
Thanks, Nashilonga. Yeah, I think you raised a good point that we're going to talk about in a little bit, about the importance of collaboration with all types of CSOs nationally, particularly those that might be based in more rural regions that might have opportunity or information on how to engage in the UPR. So yeah, I think that's a really important point raised. So we're actually going to open the floor up to Alu. So speaking of digital rights, they're having some power issues at the moment. So we need to make sure that we catch their sort of expertise and answers now, before their computer decides to, or their power source decides to give out on us. So I think this is a good segue, Alu, to sort of talk about collaboration and advocacy you've conducted with your sort of grassroots approach. So as we've seen, the pandemic has shifted UPR advocacy activities from being hosted in Geneva to being hosted remotely and locally. The Gambia was one of the last reviews that was based, the pre-session anyways, was based in Geneva. That's actually where we met. So I was wondering then how you could sort of talk about how you've seen that sort of change in UPR advocacy and what activities you've been conducting with Give One around amplifying digital rights at the UPR.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna, and for giving me this opportunity. I am excited to be here to share my experience with the project that we've been working on digital rights advocacy in the Gambia. Like the UPR, because Gambia was living in a dictatorship for 22 years. So most of the people advocating through the UPR process were not based in the Gambia. But, like in 2016, when there was change and then a lot of hopes were high in the Gambia as to what would be the next level. There was a lot of promises that the government made, and it was true that I started working with your project on the UP Gambia submission on digital rights. That was the first time we made a submission on digital rights, even though we had a lot of amendments with the previous government as to some of the draconian laws that we have when it comes to stifling dissent online, because literally everything that has been happening offline has shifted online. So having these regulations protecting people online was very vital. And then hopes were high. We were in Geneva, made great presentations. We had like a very good lobbying with the embassies. I think all our recommendations were put forward to the Gambia when they came, when the Minister for Justice came for the proper the review in November. Then after that, because the approach that we used with the Give One project was to have other stakeholders that are also doing similar work that we're doing. And then part of their submissions included some of the things that we were also having, more like things were similar. And then fortunately for us, some of the things were approved by Parliament, like the access to information law. That was part of the approach that we used during the UPR. So it was like more of like a multi-stakeholder approach from the grassroots, even though it was part of our plans, but other people too had it. So we supported, made it like a joint advocacy project, moving it forward. So that one has been approved by Parliament and then signed by the President, but the implementation is what we're waiting for. So most of the time, what I learned from this thing is like when governments go to Geneva, they make everything look nice. Like they said, we are doing this, we're doing that, and then, maybe because they want good ranking or something, but it's up to the CSOs on the ground to keep them accountable to some of the things that they've said in Geneva as to these are some of the implementations that we have conducted during these years. So like I said, it's up to the CSOs to put that into perspective, to say, you said this is not happening in our country. Can we do this? And sometimes it's very difficult. Everything will look nice on the paper, but in reality, nothing changes for the people. It takes time. So what we're doing in the Gambia right now is we're trying to do that follow-up, because with the pandemic, now that people cannot travel that much, but most of the things have been happening locally. So we continue like strengthening this digital right coalition that we're having in the Gambia as to follow up onto all the points that we have put in across in Geneva. That is, now we have the access to information law. Now there's a data privacy bill that the government has not been popularizing that much, that we engage in them right now, putting up a structure in engaging the National Assembly, like the advocacy project that we had with them through the ICT Act of 2009. That part has been amended, and we're still pushing for more digital friendly laws in most of those things. So we continue in that on the grassroots level in trying to engage our national assemblies, because most of the time, one of the problems that I realized with the national assemblies, most of them do not understand these laws. They come and then the capacity is not there. And then at the end of the day, they just vote based on political reason. They would not look at the interests of the population. They just look at what the interest of the government is, that is the central government, who will always back themselves. So the approach that Give One has been using is when we learn from the constitution, because we had a draft constitution that did not pass Parliament, which we believe based on one or two clauses which overrule all the others because they did not look at the larger interests of the people. They just look at maybe the term limit of the president, how long is he going to serve, and things like that. Some of those minor stuff, and then the greater good of the constitution has been thrown into the dustbin because of one or two things. So, but this is why, given we're changing our approach, like using the UPR approach, that is the UPR advocacy mechanism, engage in these national assemblies before they get this bill. We review this, talk about some of these things, because when they understand these things, it's easy. And then, so this is what we've been using moving forward. And Gambia is getting a report, I think in May or something. So we're trying to make sure that all these laws, all these promises that the government made in Geneva are putting into law. So we have election in December. It's interesting times in the Gambia. So we seeing what's going to happen next. Thank you, Hannah.
Thanks, Salu. Yeah, you made a really good point about how when governments are in Geneva, they put on a very like nice, happy, professional face, but it might be quite different when they're kind of being put up to following up with those promises back at home. So that we definitely always see a disconnect. You mentioned talking about educating and awareness within Parliament and overall government officials in order to kind of educate them about some of these newer laws around digital rights. As you've said, the Gambia has gone through quite an evolution over the last couple of years. So I was wondering if you could give folks advice on how to do that, conduct that awareness with policymakers. As we know, digital rights is, if not one of the, if not the newest human right. So there's a sort of huge gap of knowledge there. So yeah, how are you conducting that sort of awareness and education to these policymakers?
Yeah, thank you very much. The examples are all over the place when it comes to digital rights issues. Everyone is affected. Sometimes when you're dealing with the government, they just see the political aspect of things. That is what the activists are saying online, how people are keeping them accountable. That is their worry. When you talk about digital rights, that's what they look at. When the pandemic came, it exposes a lot of realities as to what some of the things that people have been saying, that Gambia doesn't even have a digital infrastructure. We have seen it was only the well-off in the countries whose children were able to attend online classes. Like let's say 90, we don't even know the statistics, but one could even say 90% of the children in the country, especially in the rural areas, couldn't access things online. And these were their rights. If a portion of the country were having classes online, the others we are not having. So these were all the things that we put together when we have these advocacy engagements with them, to show to them that this is not a political issue. This is like a human rights issue for everyone. Privacy, we've seen an examples of privacy where government officials are targeted. We tell them this is what the ordinary citizens are going through. So we use some of these life stories to put to them, having this one-on-one engagement with them, like for instance, we have had a very successful one with the ICT committee of the National Assembly, because when whatever bill comes to the National Assembly, there is a committee that has a special focus on it. So with us, the ICT committee, we engage them, tell them this is some of the things that are happening. Sometimes it would be funny that some of them don't even know of some of these laws are existing in the country. And then when you engage them, lecture them on it, and then we organize this mass campaign, like getting influential people, talk to them to understand certain things, like the video that we had on Internet Shutdown, where we had the president of the Gambia Bar Association, a CEO of a financial institution. Some of these people are not openly politically affiliated to any party, but they talk about the general interest of the people. Let's say one of the famous musicians in the country talk about like how this is affecting them, how the cost of internet is affecting them, how they need most of these things improved. And when you galvanize that local support, they understand because they are the helm of affairs. So it's easy to have that conversation with them when they understand. Sometimes they feel targeted with certain approach. They get scared thinking you're after them. But no, we try to explain it to them. This is beyond all of us. This is a global problem that all of us are going through. And then when we work together, we can come up with sustainable solutions that would benefit everyone.
Thanks, Salu. Yeah, you made some really interesting points. I mean, one that, yeah, this is a global issue. This is not an issue specific to, in this case, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, and Namibia. This is, we're fighting for data protection laws in every single country in the world. So, I mean, government should not feel pressured because it's the internet's the same elsewhere. And yeah, I think you made a good point about awareness in terms of like using influencers and like talking about sort of like the general understanding of the internet and how important it is. And I do think awareness then with the general public and politicians isn't that different, because I think we sometimes see the similar level of awareness, if not maybe sometimes more in the general public, because they understand that they're online all day. So thank you for for those comments. So Joel, we haven't heard from you yet, so I would like to circle over to you. Sierra Leone recently had its review. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how your advocacy on the UPR and the UN has evolved over the last 2 years, and in general, how the effect of the pandemic has had on conducting digital rights advocacy in Sierra Leone, and then in relation to the UPR and the UN.
Thank you so much, Hannah. It's a really wonderful opportunity to be on this panel, highlighting some of the successes we've made advancing digital rights issues in Sierra Leone, but also just examine the challenges, especially within the pandemic context. You know, COVID has disrupted everything, right? I was listening to Aliu from the Gambia, and I was quite touched by his mentioning of the levels of inequality that existed with regards to accessing digital education, especially for deprived kids in rural communities. The stories are almost the same, right, back here in Sierra Leone, where the more privileged in society, you know, had the opportunity to have their kids enroll in online schools, you know, while the pandemic was raging, you know. So I mean, COVID has disrupted a lot, and as you mentioned in your introduction, it has also evolved the way UPR advocacy, you know, has been ongoing from the more Geneva-based advocacy and engagement to more localized and grassroots-led initiatives, you know. But I like to highlight one positive or one good thing that the pandemic brought, you know. And I think this is quite ironic, but I think in a sense, the pandemic has helped highlight the importance of digital rights and the relevance of digital rights advocacy. You know, more and more people use the internet, engaged online during the pandemic, whether for work, for school, and you name them, for almost everything, to shop online. You know, there are studies which suggest that online shopping is basically the future. So a lot changed, and this has given the opportunity to digital rights advocates like myself to solidly present our case for why it's absolutely important to pass digital rights laws, you know, right across the continent, not just here in Sierra Leone. Yeah, so I think that's one wonderful opportunity that the pandemic presented. I mean, just enabling us to illustrate our case. Say, well, this is why we need digital rights. More and more people are going online. More young people are using the internet. More people, even you politicians, are shopping online. Are you not concerned about the privacy or protection of your data? Are you not concerned that someone could bully your kid online, or an online abuser will target your wife or your daughter? So it's made the whole thing move from what used to be an elitist approach to viewing digital rights issues and digital rights advocacy to something that we can now all embrace, and even let politicians understand that yes, so this thing affects me. So if I pass good laws, I'll also benefit from them. So that's one way. But apart from that, I think it's presented an opportunity for grassroots organizations to collaborate And that's one thing we did quite excellently back here in Sierra Leone. In the past, most people, most organizations will be more concerned about getting the funds and competing in terms of who leads what digital rights advocacy or advocacy in general. But we were able to innovate and say, well, we could actually work together because the issues are mounting and we don't have enough time on our hands. It's better if we work together. And that's something Choosing Generation did in collaboration with the Sierra Leone Reporters Union here in Sierra Leone, another organization called the Citizens Advocacy Network, and a few others. We jointly participated in drafting Sierra Leone's submission to the UPR, and then engaged in pre-UPR activities, which included a seminar. That was because again of COVID restrictions, limited in the number of attendees, but was broadcast virtually, enabling people from all parts of the country and the world to engage. So yes, COVID, of course, has made it more difficult, more challenging for people to physically engage, where perhaps you might find more impact, right? Directly engaging with the stakeholders. But like I mentioned, it has presented us with a wonderful opportunity, which I think we must capitalize on, which is the fact that we are now able to present a more solid case, because the examples are glaring. We could more easily illustrate the urgency and the need for data protection laws in whether it's Sierra Leone or the Gambia, or the need for very people-friendly cybersecurity legislations, So yeah, I think, and in my view, that's how the COVID pandemic has helped evolve digital UPR advocacy, especially back here in Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Joel. So on that note, you were talking about overall like innovation and then collaboration with multiple partners, trying not to have any sort of competition, working together on stakeholder submissions and these pre-session events. Now, Shilongo, I was wondering if you would also want to comment on that and either the importance of that collaboration or kind of give advice to the folks in the room on how to conduct that sort of collaboration, and on sort of your experience, because you've worked with multiple organizations, you have many hats, so you're collaborating yourself throughout the day. So yeah, if you could comment on that, I think everyone would like to hear.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, what we have learned during this process, especially in preparing for our report, which was in itself also collaborative, was that we found other CSOs very interested in informing the report that we were busy compiling. But even, outside of the report, when we held events, everybody wanted to be part of, like they wanted they appreciated the opportunity to engage together. At most, like I've mentioned before, that the discussions or the issues about, for instance, as my colleagues have highlighted, whether during COVID, only 30% of Namibians children had access to schooling environment because it obviously went virtual like everyone else, was that it affected everybody within the CSO sector. Initially, we were targeting, or we were hoping to engage with organizations that had previously, maybe made submissions through other partnerships, or those who were recognized by, the Ministry of Justice, who from a government perspective have been leading this aspect before. But when we got to digest the issues of digital rights, like I've mentioned before, issues of pricing, issues of the lack of protection or the lack of laws, on hand, when we have so many, even local leaders falling victims to things like scamming, and raising that to them to say, look, should there have been a law? There could have been a way you could, try and deal with these issues. So it needed a bit more of explanations, of understanding and relating it to individuals, but also CSOs, that this is what digital rights would mean within your your environment. People interact, obviously, and organizations interact with technologies, be it, within the CSO sector, they deal with a large amount of data that informs their programming, but they wouldn't know that should that data be compromised, that becomes, holding it, one, but also the opportunity for it to get compromised. It falls within the digital rights aspect. So people were very keen to understand, okay, so if this is what it means, so this then is our concern. So we found very interesting, engaging partnerships and collaborations with other organizations. One of the issues, for instance, as you might know, that Namibia doesn't have a data protection and privacy law, doesn't have anything on cybercrime. Of course, we have these laws in draft format, and which is very important, was that recently we took the law and we've put virtually organizations in the room and say, the upcoming law, data protection bill, looks like this. At the moment, we found that it has no protection, especially for women and girls who've become very targeted on issues of cyber violence. And we managed to get partnership and support from other CEOs, I think about 11 organizations, could have been more, who said that this is a big issue, and we think that this is the law that could engage on these specific issues. So there's a lot of...
Sorry, Nashalama, just to clarify something, were you talking about then collaboration across CSOs that aren't focusing on digital rights, CSOs focusing on issues, in this case, like violence against women and girls?
Sorry, did your question ask if there's CSO collaborating on safety for women and girls? Yes, so that's one of the things. Thank you, Hannah. Yes, so yeah, recently we've got this coalition or collaboration with about 10 or 11 organizations with the countries, really at the intersection of gender, technology, who all of a sudden we were like, okay, this is a key issue for us too. And so we would like to put together those recommendations and send those recommendations, like our colleagues in the Gambia and Sierra Leone, to the parliamentary committee that deals with ICT and innovations, but also to the Law Reform and Development Commission that comes up with the laws, because this law is still in the making process, and in the ministry related to the ICT. And so that we see increasingly more collaboration happening. And, previously within, and I would want to understand, this is the reason why. Previously, organizations want to work by themselves. It's, it's issues of, vying for the same funders, for instance. It could be a lot of other things, but what we found is that with the openness in collaboration, everybody is willing to say, we are supporting this, because digital rights issues, like has a lot of players and has to be informed, or decisions have to be informed by multiple stakeholders. And so we thought that in the collaboration is very key, and going forward within the UPR review and mechanisms, and we hope to work together, especially from ISOC, but also from other CSOs within the digital space, to work to continue this working together, at least within this 4 years before the next review, or 3 years within the next review, and really engages the policy formation processes, but also raise awareness to the current shortcomings, to ensure that digital rights are protected, and that all civil society organizations are sort of in the loop, and they're able to trickle down some of those issues within their implementations. Thank you.
Thanks, Nashalunga. Yeah, you made some excellent points there. I think too that stood out to me were, one, really presenting digital rights, not so sort of esoteric in a way. I mean, digital rights is not getting scammed online. And as Joel said, all of our government officials are shopping online. They want to keep shopping online. It's tangible, kind of everyday things. And two, I think you brought out a really good point on collaboration, not only because this question was really about like civil society collaboration across freedom of expression, but obviously it's vital to also collaborate across other human rights. As as Joel pointed out, the pandemic has really indicated to everyone how important the internet is. No CSO can function without the internet, full stop. And I don't think you can have any activists really refute that. Alu, I was wondering if you wanted to sort of jump in and talk about the collaboration you are doing with other CSOs in the Gambia. Maybe you could then share a bit more details on the activities you're doing on the post review and that collaboration you're doing. And I know that you all have had a lot of success in the Gambia, so maybe we could figure out on how to replicate that in other states. Well, I think you're muted, Alu.
Okay, I didn't figure it out.
Okay, all good now. Thanks.
Thank you again, once again. Like I said, the problems are they're mostly similar when it comes to digital rights, like protection of journalists. We can be advocating for the general well-being of everyone online, but journalists would be concerned with protections of journalists online, their privacy and things like that. So this is where collaborations comes into play. Like I said earlier, the access to information bill. This was part of our submission to the UPR, which the GPU co-signed, the Gambia Press Union, because it's an area of interest for them with all the other stuffs that we put in place. But they were very interested in this because with an access to information law, it will protect whistleblowers online, and was a law called the official. There's still that law called the Official Secret Amendment Act, which could jail whistleblowers many years in prison. This law has been in place since colonial days. So collaborating with CSOs help you understand what are their perspectives in putting up your proposals together. And this has really helped us because now the GPU, we're working on the access to information law, which went through parliament, unanimously voted, and then the president signed it into law. Right now we're working with them on data privacy and all the other stakeholders on the ground, because it always helps authenticate what you're doing. And then when you have all these stakeholders on board, it broadens your scope. Like you get more support for this because a lot of people have stake in whatever thing you're advocating for to be law. So always it's good to collaborate when you have, especially when you have similarities, because at the end of the day, these are the same problems that everyone faces. Like we're working with the Gambia Cybersecurity Alliance, that we've been doing a lot of advocacy with them when it comes to privacy. Sometimes people will see you in the front, they will call us, we have cybersecurity issues like a government office. We will refer them to the Gambia Cybersecurity Alliance. And then when they also have issues, they link it to us and then we work together. So this has been helping us, keeping the government accountable, especially this post-UPR that the draft constitution failed. But there are other amendments that we are pushing through various laws, because what the problem that we have in the Gambia is we have very ambiguous laws that you don't know would be in this clause until you get in trouble with it, they go and quote it and then bring it. But when you have all these partners working on various laws, it helps you have that greater perspective in having like a well-meaning change for whatever thing you're doing. So you can never go wrong with collaborations.
Thank you, Alu. No, it was really great to hear that perspective. And like what was mentioned before, you are lobbying and conducting research sort of at a pivotal time to influence the current and future legal landscape in the Gambia. So yeah, I think your work is really exciting in that sense. So Joel, I wanted to sort of come back to you. So you are involved in a really fascinating initiative in Sierra Leone, where you are working with youth involvement around the continent and sort of awareness with that group and generation. So how is Chosen Generation then innovated on awareness and education on digital rights? And how can folks learn about how you're conducting awareness for youth in terms of how to replicate that in their countries? As we've mentioned, awareness to the general public can usually be mirrored to awareness towards policymakers. And sometimes we see a level of awareness that maybe the youth have, that maybe politicians have. So yeah, if you could talk about sort of innovating and awareness that you're conducting, that would be really interesting to hear about.
Yes, Hannah. So we felt it was absolutely important to have young people, young Sierra Leoneans, take a lead in digital rights advocacy in Sierra Leone. And that was based on the fact that Sierra Leone's population, more than 70%, is constituted of people aged 35 and under. So we represent a very huge demographic, right? And apart from that, globally, worldwide, many estimates suggest that young people, youths, are more engaged online. They are twice as likely to be networked, or using mobile devices or using the internet than the global, compared to the global population. So we felt it only made sense to have them take a lead, because most of the things, most of the digital rights issues affect them in one way or the other. They are bloggers, they work online, they are journalists, they engage in all sorts of online activities. So we believe they were also more vulnerable to online abuses, and that it was critical to have them move the agenda. So what we did with the pre-UPR advocacy strategy for Sierra Leone was to develop a really youth-centered advocacy initiative. A seminar actually where about 80% of the panel was made up of very young professionals, and even the audience, we had an audience that was composed mostly of young people. We believe that way young people could take the lead and further amplify the stories, because again, we have this gap. Digital rights issues are relatively novel in Sierra Leone. For most people would say, oh, I'm advocating for digital rights. The first question would be, what are digital rights? So we felt if we targeted that group, we could be able to achieve greater impact, because they are the biggest group, they are the biggest users of the internet. They constitute the largest.
Joel, what age group? You're talking about youth, but I don't think we necessarily know the ages of the folks you're working with. Is it a huge range, or I think that'd be interesting to know.
Yeah, so I mean, in Sierra Leone, the youth is anyone between the age of 18 and 35. So
okay, those
were our primary. Yes, so people aged 18 and 35. So young adults, if you may. So those were our targets. And like I mentioned, much of our panel in the seminar, we are young people. These were young professionals. We had a young lawyer, who spoke about the gaps in the proposed cybersecurity bill, for instance. We had people talk about freedom of expression online and how women we are so vulnerable to online abuses, and why it was absolutely critical that a mechanism or a legislative framework be developed that help protect women and young people in general. So that approach has been quite successful because one, we were able to address, the digital advocacy awareness gap, which exists, because for most people, they were hearing about digital rights and digital rights advocacy, for the very first time, or about the Universal Periodic Review for the very first time. So it was deliberate that we targeted young people, and I think it's an approach that could be adopted elsewhere, because especially in Africa, because the demographic are mostly the same. Much of Africa, the population is mainly young people. So targeting them, educating them, and just sensitizing them about their rights, online could be pivotal to the future of digital rights advocacy at the UPR.
Thanks, Joel. No, that's super important to kind of hear that you are incorporating, as you could say, like a huge part of the population. I think we all seen that like young people are usually sort of left out of political discussions or not seen as important political players, which is just not true. Young folks globally are more political than ever before. We're seeing so many movements led by youth, and they also understand computers and the internet way more than the other generations, and they are future leaders. Exactly.
Indeed.
So I think on that note, we can go to another question that maybe all of our panelists would like to weigh in on. So a common thread of today is how the pandemic has shifted UPR advocacy activities from being hosted to Geneva to being hosted remotely and locally. All three partners have talked about activities they've conducted in their country in order to amplify digital rights at the UPR. So Nashi, it would be good to get your perspective. So travel is now opening back up internationally. Geneva is opening up more now that the vaccine is slowly being rolled out worldwide. So I was wondering, with your successes of the Namibia-based activities, if you see these grassroots activities as more permanent, or do you think UPR advocacy is going to revert back to just being based in Geneva, or are you seeing some permanent changes looking to the future?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I think COVID has presented us with possibly a new ways of doing things, and that helps us actually with even the decentralizations of the engagement. That said, that we don't see, because even if Geneva was there, it's not all of us that would go there. It's issues of resources, and especially for CSOs at whatever level that they are. And so I hope, and I think this is everyone's hope across all sector of engagement, is that these remote and virtual interactions remain, and they remain forever. That they have provided for most of us an opportunity to engage at levels that, rooms were constantly closed. If it's not rooms, then it's resources to get there, and even also just opened new ways of advocating. And I think this is possibly going to, if not possibly, it should remain like a permanent feature of advocacy. I remember it was in May, Namibia, when Namibia was being reviewed, it was so good to be sitting in Windhoek, and be part of that engagement, hear what countries directly review or are recommending to Namibia. Usually you would have to hear that when a report comes to say this is what happens, this is who was in the room, and this is who made the recommendations. But even from your side as small media and CIPESA and the project specifically that you carry with UPROL, it was very good to see, you tweeting about that, and for us retweeting that and really amplifying the messages already on the social media platforms, and ability to tag our ministers, and not just the Minister of Justice, who could have happened to be in Geneva or doing the presentations, but everyone else that is in the same line of advocacy. So I thought that was very, very good, and we hope that this feature of remote and virtual participation remains permanent for good, that yes, those who are able to get into Geneva and get into the room and do the lobbies physically, they can still do that. But even then, there's program people usually who would be doing the work, and those would have better connections with other CSOs, but also within the communities that they are working themselves, to say, listen, remember that project that we've been working on, whether it is elevating hunger, whatever the recommendations are. Of course, for digital rights, for us, it's also very good, but being able to connect people immediately. I remember I had a WhatsApp dissemination group, that when the link for Namibia came, it was very easy for me to say, hey, everyone that has been part of our process, but also we have identified as the Internet Society as stakeholder. Here's the link. The review for Namibia happens in 2 hours, and then again you are able to remind them, hey, it's in 10 minutes, it had started now, and really getting that engagement already at that point. I thought that was very, very good, and was very crucial, and I hope again that opportunity remains forever. And and like I said, that I think COVID has just showed us that there's just better ways of doing the engagements. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Nashi. Yes, I mean, you made some really important points on how, COVID has really democratized the UPR process. I don't think we necessarily thought we needed a pandemic to prove that. And I don't think we would ever sort of, want to ensure that something so horrible like this would happen. But it really did give a lot of opportunity, within Namibia, at least, all the organizations that worked on those pre-session activities and all the folks that participated in review, that wouldn't have happened in the past. Because as you said, we can't send everyone to Geneva in terms of cost and just logistics. People have families, people have other, both of you, I think, have like 10 jobs each, because you're just like digital rights warriors in your countries. So yeah, I think that's a really important aspect that I agree that needs to definitely stay put. But I think the in-person aspect will be sort of an added bonus at this point. Joel, so correct me if I'm wrong, was this the first previous cycle, the first cycle that you had participated on Sierra Leone? Is that correct?
Yes, I participated in the last cycle for Sierra Leone UPR 38. That was my very first engagement with the fascinating world of digital rights advocacy at the UPR.
So I think you have an interesting perspective then, because you've only been conducting advocacy,
Actually,
following the start of the pandemic. So I guess it would be good to get your comments as well on how you think towards the future this sort of grassroots approach should stay. Would you personally like to go to Geneva? Do you think that is still important? It would be great to hear your thoughts, because also your activities in lobbying were also very successful within Sierra Leone.
All right, thank you. I think it's a very interesting question. But yeah, I feel not just for the UPR advocacy, but most engagements in general, whether it's meetings at the World Bank, whether it's the World Economic Forum, or other similar engagement. The future will never be the same. That's how I see it. Technology and tech tools, virtual engagement platforms like the one we are now using will continue to play a very big part, in how we engage, in how we advocate for the issues that matter to us. So for me, I personally think what we'll see going forward is a hybrid approach where we have some form of physical engagement, because no form of technology or technological innovation will actually replace the effectiveness, right, of physical one-on-one engagement to pass your messages or your views across. So that's, for me, represent the future of UPR advocacy. Some elements of physical presence in Geneva, but also a lot of online or virtual engagement at local and grassroots levels. Yeah, I think that's what the future represents, Hannah.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I agree. We can't go back now, right? We've already sort of opened the floodgates of opportunity. And Nashi mentioned before on how we can include smaller initiatives that might be in villages or and kind of rural areas, and it's just not realistic to expect them to be traveling to Geneva to conduct these things. But we can obviously work together locally in order to amplify digital rights at the UPR. So I'm just gonna go into some of the questions that I've gone through. Harry from Sierra Leone has said there's a huge gap in capacity of CSOs and stakeholders when it comes to digital rights. And as I mentioned, it is digital rights is one of the newest, if not the newest, human rights. So he would like to know from the panelists how this gap can be addressed. So yeah, this gap is in terms of capacity, and then therefore, how can we kind of amplify digital rights with sort of these kind of squished resources in general? Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure if I can go. Yes,
you can go.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, I think it is true, possibly also inevitable, that digital rights issues aren't very well known. Yet they affect everybody, and yet everybody has a digital life somehow. And so yes, so capacity really is lacking. And how do we address that? I think for those of us who understand or have been working, in these issues, it's really important that we concretize this, that we get our colleagues who maybe were just working on HIV and being that their work, but really get them to see the right aspect to their work, especially in the internet space. So a lot of resources in terms of funding needs to be availed for building this capacity of CSOs, but also different players. I'm happy to hear that my colleagues from Gambia and Joel from Sierra Leone has taken the same approach that we have, really engaging the lawmakers, the policymakers in understanding the human rights aspect to these laws. And that's very, very important. So we start where we can. If we can make the policymakers understand these things, at least they are at a level where they are able to arrest arrest situations, because when a law is passed, it obviously affects everybody else. And so if we make them, the policymakers, aware that this is actually the impact that this law would have to the people. For instance, few years ago, our parliament, or at least the National Assembly, part of it, because we've got a bicameralism parliament, you know, they were very hell-bent on regulating social media. It took us as activists, but also maybe just researchers or people that are engaged in the digital rights aspect to actually reach out to say, Honorable Minister, do you actually understand that this is what would mean? This is when that regulation is passed, these are the kind of implication it will have for you as a lawmaker, but also this is how it will be affecting citizens. And some of those calls, for instance, in regulating the social media space, would come, it could be very reactionary, very personal to something very little that has happened to them. And so it is not fair that those larger effects should be applied to affect everyone else. So yes, a lot of work needs to be done, a lot of capacity needs to be done, and for those who are in positions and for those who understand, must already engage. Luckily, the young people are, they are on these platforms, and they are they use the digital space much more, and they have an understanding directly. And we found out, for instance, in our engagements, that they are able to articulate those issues, and they're able to help different citizens and society, levels within the societies understand the effects of that. But there's a lot of awareness that needs to be done, indeed. And it needs all of us, and it needs resources, and it needs time, and it also needs time even just to volunteer for those who have the knowledge. Yeah.
Thanks, Nashi. Yes, lots of resources and lots of time. But I think, yeah, if you are innovative as with the tactics as what you've talked about, and Joel and Lou, you can kind of make up for that kind of lack of capacity. You just have to be very smart with what you do. So I was wondering if Alu, thank you, welcome back. I'm glad that you're back with us. Joel or yourself, either you want to comment on that? If not, we can move on to the next question.
No, yeah, I mean, I think the issue of lack of capacity is quite serious, and one that really requires some attention. I look at capacity not just from the point of view of absence of resources, but just the general lack of knowledge and awareness, to engage on digital rights advocacy. And sometimes politicians, lawmakers just capitalize on this lack of awareness. So take the passing of a cybersecurity bill, for instance. Currently at our level, very few Sierra Leoneans can meaningfully engage, on whatever processes, that culminate into the passing of the legislation, because most people are just not aware. Some people ask, why do I need a cybercrime bill? I mean, how does that affect me? So the level of awareness is low. That's where a lot more engagement and advocacy is actually required. Even sometimes among the educated, you are shocked at the level of ignorance of some of these issues by even people who were educated. So a lot more trainings, but perhaps even embedding digital rights advocacy in our curriculum, whether it's at universities or colleges, or just to empower See, because knowledge is power. If you don't know, you cannot engage. For most people, if you shut down the internet, what does that mean? Okay, yeah, they've shut it down. I mean, they have more important things to do. So I mean, it's fine. They're absolutely fine. Not fully appreciating, understanding the graveness of an internet shutdown, or the implications, for a number of things. So I think addressing those gaps, is really pivotal to ensuring the effectiveness of advocacy and engagement. Sometimes the other day I was doing some work, and I wanted to find out the status of an e-transaction bill that was proposed in Sierra Leone, sometimes in 2019. The bill went to Parliament, and there are mixed reports. Some people saying the bill was actually passed, and a number of other people, no, it wasn't passed. Even after making contact with stakeholders, I still had conflicting opinions on, and that was in 2019. So no one still knows whether the e-transaction bill for Sierra Leone was passed or not. And if you go online, you cannot find the actual act or legislation. So sometimes I think politicians use the ignorance of the people, or the lack of awareness of the people, to just it's the same with the cybersecurity bill. Now, it was passed in Parliament about 2 or 3 months ago, sent to the president. But no one has
Joel,
currently knows whether that's something. Yes, sorry. So I was talking about the cybersecurity bill,
Yes.
Which was recently enacted by the Sierra Leone Parliament, but now waiting presidential assent. No one really knows, what's the status. Our laws actually state that within 3 months or 90 days, the president either provides assent or signs a particular law, or returns it back to Parliament. Currently, we don't know, So, I mean, it just explains the need for greater awareness and stronger advocacy on the ground to keep these people. Well, again, just even the lack of resources, which is another important area. That's why I appreciate the work that small media is doing, with the UPR program, and just what institutions like SPISA, the Collaboration on International ICT Policy, are also doing to help strengthen local capacity, because it's only when at the local level we have well-equipped, knowledgeable folks leading, pushing the agenda, that we can truly achieve the kind of impact that we truly deserve.
Thanks, Joel. No, yeah, you made some really interesting points, and yeah, I think that's really helpful for our audience to know. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're always going to have this gap in capacity, right? But you have to figure out how to kind of work with it and work around it, and also at the same time make sure that politicians aren't kind of taking advantage of that gap, as you said, because things can kind of slip under if they're not sort of regular front-facing human rights issues. So another question has come in. So how successful have post-review engagements with state actors been? Are states being receptive to following up and implementing recommendations on digital rights and freedom of expression? Halu, perhaps you would like to start on this one, because you've conducted a lot of post-review engagements. Yeah, it would be really interesting on how receptive they've been to these recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be back again. For us, like the access to information bill was very successful, that the GPU was able to mobilize with other stakeholders like the Give One in pushing for it to pass through Parliament, and then the President signed it. And the other ones too have been embedded in some of the other stuff that we've been working on like the ICT Act, some of the amendments that we have seen happen with it. But you know, with the UPR, after the reporting mechanism, sometimes the central government will be very slow in trying to send these reports back, even though when, for instance, the recent Freedom Report on internet penetration, internet freedom in the Gambia was favorable. It was all over the place. Like when they have some of those good rankings, the government will be the first to send those press releases, even though they would not do any work in relation to that, because it will be the CSOs engaged in the National Assemblies to do this. So with the Gambia, that is what we're working on right now, especially that the draft constitution failed, meaning we're not going to have a new constitution under this government. Maybe the next government, I don't know if they're going to be re-elected, but we're hoping when things like those things come again, we will engage the National Assembly to see where we can take it, because we had really good laws in the draft constitution that, you know, through the UPR mechanism, with your support and of course CPSA, we were able to make a lot of submissions that were looked into, incorporated as part of the draft constitution that failed. So when that failed now, meaning it taking the work back to zero. So this is where we are now, trying to look at the bad laws within the old constitution and trying to get the amendments done. But like I said, like it's a continuous process that we need to engage these authorities, not just waiting to meet them in Geneva, but locally. Sometimes the advantage that they use, like Joel was saying, is the population don't know. So they take advantage of the population, knowing we don't know. You only complain, like when we continue doing the stakeholders as to some of the needs that people really should have in this constitution, like help move this advocacy project forward. Because the next UPR, they would want to talk about the good things that they've achieved. Like they say, we have set up a National Human Rights Commission, we have this, we have that. So it's up to the CSOs to push this, get like a more wider multi-stakeholder approach in achieving some of these things.
Thanks, Alu. Yeah, that was interesting that you kind of talked about the speed or the delay in which states are actually responding to the recommendations and reports. And I think something interesting you mentioned is that states also want to prove that they have responded ahead of the next cycle, right? Because they want to prove to the UN and other stakeholders that they are actively involved in human rights. No country says that they're against human rights. I mean, even if maybe they've had poor records, they don't actually explicitly say it. So I think you and your GiveOne have really taken advantage of that. But I think you also talked about this tension between awareness. So we know that a lot of our policymakers don't understand these laws, yet they're taking advantage of the ignorance of the general public to pass laws that they don't fully understand. So there's like kind of various levels of sort of lack of awareness here, which potentially be quite dangerous, because they see a certain law and it sounds nice in terms of terrorism and security, but for them, but it's actually about censoring activists and journalists. I was wondering, Joel or Nashilongo, do either of you want to talk about how your states have been receptive to implementing recommendations received at the UPR in your countries?
Well, I think in Sierra Leone, the good news is that I mean, the cybersecurity bill, which was one of the recommendations in our UPR submission, has been legislated. You know, we still now wait on and call on the president to sign that, you know, into law. But I mean, that's one progress. And at our seminar, where the Deputy Minister of Information was present, he made a clear commitment to also, I mean, taking steps to pass the data protection law in Sierra Leone, you know, because of concern to many activists and many digital rights advocates, is that government has gone on to push for a cybersecurity bill without showing a similar willingness or commitment to having a data protection law. Many people agree that where cybersecurity bills and laws tend to protect government and government machinery, data protection laws more or less protect the citizens. So part of our UPR engagement is to see how we can get stakeholders, lawmakers, and government officials to try to expedite the process of legislating a data protection law. We are planning an event in the coming weeks, a month, where we'll bring all of these guys together and just talk and sort of provide citizens input to the process and push. But overall, I'm sure the reception has been quite good. You know, like I said, the pandemic has helped us all understand that these issues are not really political issues. These issues affect all of us, you know. And even as politicians, they must understand that they cannot serve as ministers or parliamentarians forever, you know. But these laws, you know, can be used against them, or the absence of those laws can affect them, you know. So I mean, that's awareness is helping, you know, digital rights and UPR advocacy back home. So generally, we are satisfied with the level of cooperation, and we hope to build on that, you know, in our coming programs and events. To principally, I mean, our major focus is how to really push for a data protection law as soon as possible.
Thanks, Joel. And I think the work that you've done with Chosen Generation has been so successful. You lobbied for a specific recommendation, and you all received it. What was
yes,
it, like a
yeah,
month later?
Time,
it's,
you know,
like, yeah, it's amazing.
For the first time, you know, in our history, Sierra Leone had a number of digital rights recommendations, right? Which came up as very good news, you know, because it's just right that we have recommendations on digital rights. It's just right that we have our politicians and government officials understand that people have rights online, and those rights must be respected, and they must take steps, you know, to actually pass legislations, bills, and policies that promote citizens' rights to live online, you know, because I mean, most of our lives are now online, so we just have to accept that and take steps to actually ensure we are safe.
And our policymakers have to accept that too, right?
It is true.
And yeah, I think it's really exciting because the work of Chosen Generation and Give One have really seen direct result of the UPR changing legislation on digital rights. And so, I mean, we can see tangibly how important this is and how it's really has changed the internet and digital landscape in both of your countries, and as well as Namibia. We have one last question that's come in, and maybe Nashilonga would like to address it. Kind of back to sort of the community kind of grassroots approach. One of the participants would like to know, what is the role of community stakeholders in amplifying digital rights? So again, the role of community stakeholders within digital rights amplification.
Yeah, for us, especially as organizations within the CSOs, sorry, I wear so many hats sometimes. The role is it's really in the consistencies and the ability to be reflecting on these issues every time they come up. I don't consider myself as a leader within the digital space, but I really consider myself as a digital rights activist, right? So from my part, I reflect on issues, and luckily I have sort of platforms, if I can say. So for instance, when there was this instance, I think the Social Security Commission was hacked, and data of 50,000 people who are members of the Social Security was stolen, and until now it's not recovered. I'm at least able to write opinions on this, and with that then is really to say, this is the reason why we need those laws. because when you have a law in place, for instance, it will be able to, hold institutions, responsible or, accountable to say, you have to have your systems, very protected, because this is the data of the people. And if you do fail or incidences like this happens again, this is the punitive measures that you could face. So again, it also needs us to engaging constantly, find the rooms, get to places where you are able to engage on specific issues. The importance is also collaboration again. Find opportunities to collaborate, maybe with organizations that might not necessarily be working directly on, the internet policy and development, like the Internet Society, but have a lot of aspects that that deals with digital rights, for instance. So collaboration, raising issues when they're applicable, and there's so many opportunities where we can do that. Like the Access to Information Day that was just passed, and really highlighting the many intersections that exist. At community level, it's engaging in those, taking leadership in programs or collaborations, and volunteer the time in making that awareness, in ensuring that awareness happens everywhere else. Yes, maybe at policy level, you would need, your high level engagement with policymakers, but there's so much we can do at grassroots level. For instance, just a campaign I saw recently at the University of Namibia. Students have this campaign where everybody, just say that the bullying online is not okay, and that raises awareness without really using so much resources, because one, people are already on the social media platform, and instead of just being there scrolling and updating, you really are messaging, but also constantly amplifying the need that digital rights are human rights, and they must be respected, they must be recognized, and they must be be given attention, just in everything else. What we found out is that, sorry, I know the time is up, is that even politicians, even these policymakers, and most of the time they themselves are not aware. They have to follow requirements, for instance, by ITU and all these other bodies where they are part of, in making sure that the laws are in place. So what happens is that there's a replications of international laws, or laws that has been passed somewhere else, especially those with digital aspect to it. They get implemented, or they get passed in the countries, and they just don't fit within the issues that affect a specific country. And so hence the need to collaborate, hence there's a need to raise awareness, and then there's a need to constantly engage. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nashilonga. No, you made some really good points on how it's key to collaborate with these local partners, but I mean, everyone sort of has their own responsibility or position within UPR advocacy, right? Like everyone should have a seat at the table, just everyone has different strengths within that. And I think on that note, we are going to conclude today's session, just to review at everyone, sort of some key themes that everyone said. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has permanently influenced, how we lobby governmental stakeholders now. We're looking at a grassroots approach with national lobbying and events. And this would then be coupled with Geneva in-person presence if and when that opens up. The methods and actions discussed today really are the future of UN advocacy and lobbying. And we've seen direct legislative changes from recommendations at the UPR, particularly around data protection laws. And so that's really exciting. And it really just shows how important the UPR is and how it's has been a real missed opportunity, but a really important opportunity of the three panelists here today, and the work that they've discussed that they have done in their countries, so Sierra Leone, Namibia, and the Gambia. And just to everyone, I put the links to everyone's organization. If you want to follow everyone's work, including the Uproar tools, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the session. And I just wanted to thank all the panelists for participating and all the participants in the room today. Really think events like this are vital to preserving not only human rights online, but all human rights, as we know that internet access is sort of bolstering every right that all CSOs are working on. So yes, so thank you so much to everyone. Feel free to get in touch on Twitter at uproar.fyi. I can put that link in here if anyone's interested for further resources. And yes, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to moderate, and thank you again to the panelists for your incredible expertise and sharing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.